We all have high expectations for Garrett Nussmeier. I do, you do, the coaching staff does, every LSU fan does. And it's fair to have high expectations for Garrett Nussmeier because that's the life of the starting quarterback at LSU. But what are maybe unreasonable and unfair expectations for Garrett Nussmeier?
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, y'all? Welcome into Locked On LSU. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. So wherever you listen, however you listen, shouts out to my everydayers out there for making us your first listen every single day. Make sure to like the podcast, rate, review, subscribe to the YouTube page. Always appreciate you for interacting with the podcast. But today is Wednesday, which means it's a mailbag Wednesday, which means we get to you. We get to your questions, we get to your comments, concerns, things that I may have seen floating around there that I want to respond to, questions that you had. So without further ado, let's get into it. Just a reminder, we do this every week. Next week I'll be on vacation, so we won't do it next week. But we do this every week. Send in your questions. You can comment them on YouTube. I get a bunch of DMs on Twitter. You are more than welcome to send your questions in via DM. My Twitter is at CarolineFenton1. So we'll get to your questions on the next Mailbag Wednesday edition of Locked On LSU. So let's get into it because I talked a lot on the podcast yesterday about Garrett Nussmeier, about how the ceiling versus the floor of Garrett Nussmeier and where he kind of falls within that margin will be a massive part of what LSU can achieve this year. I think a fair expectation for LSU is making the college football playoff. I think that's lofty, sure, but it's a 12-team playoff. And so I think that, if you're a 10-2 SEC team, I think that gets you in the playoff. And I think asking LSU to be 10-2 after being 9-3 the last two seasons is fair to ask. I think it's fair. But a lot of that depends on Garrett Nussmeier. Another big part of that is the defense, absolutely. But a big part of that is Garrett Nussmeier and how he's able to grow into this starting role. It's not going to happen overnight. The Garrett Nussmeier we see week 12, I guess that is that week 13, week 14, maybe even against Oklahoma is going to be different than the week 1 we see against USC, the week 1 Garrett Nussmeier. He's going to grow. He's going to learn what he likes, what he doesn't like. He's going to learn, maybe what's too far to push the boundaries. When is it okay to make a risk? Like, he's going to learn and he's going to grow. And that's life in football. But what Garrett Nussmeier is able to achieve, that's coaching quarterbacks the most important positions in sports. It's the most important positions in football. So it's a massive part of what LSU can achieve and accomplish this year. So while I have high expectations for Garrett Nussmeier, I think we also need to understand that he's new to this role. So there is, to a certain extent, going to be a learning curve. Is Garrett Nussmeier's learning curve as the starter going to be the same as maybe a true freshman starting? No, because Garrett Nussmeier's been around and he has matured. He has grown mentally, physically, emotionally, so on and so forth, but there's still going to be a learning curve. So one person commented on the show a couple of days ago and said, I think that everyone is underestimating Garrett Nussmeier. If his supporting players play up to par, I see Burrow 2.0. He runs better than Burrow, his arm is better, and he processes just as fast. As long as he reels in his tendency to try to force a play, there is no limit to our success. Whoa now. Whoa now. Let's reel it in a little bit. Let's calm it down a little bit. Let's chill out on the Joe Burrow expectations. Joe Burrow is one of the best quarterbacks in the history of college football. Okay, Joe Burrow, I believe, is one of two elite quarterbacks in the NFL. He and Patrick Mahomes. And I don't feel like debating anybody on that. Okay, he's better than Josh Allen. He's better than Lamar Jackson. He's not better than Patrick Mahomes, but he's one of the two best quarterbacks in the NFL. Okay, saying that Garrett Nussmeier is going to be Burrow 2.0. Now that's a little bit too big for me. Like, that's a little bit too much for me. Now, if a player is a quarterback, if Garrett Nussmeier isn't Joe Burrow, but He's still a pretty damn good quarterback. I'll take that. Because you know who is Joe Burrow? Nobody. Nobody's Joe Burrow. That's why Joe Burrow was so special. So the running ability, I don't, like I said, this commenter says he runs better than Burrow. I don't I don't necessarily agree. Like I don't like Jaden Daniels obviously better runner than Burrow. Jaden Daniels better than really any other mobile quarterback in college football, maybe with the exception of like Cam Newton and Lamar Jackson. But I don't know if I can definitively say that Garrett Nussmeier is a better runner than Joe Burrow or not. It's not like Joe Burrow was a statue in the pocket. It's not like he was like like a Peyton Manning at the end of his career post neck surgery, who was literally just a statue in the pocket. Like Joe Burrow moved around a lot too. Garrett Nussmeier, I think, is mobile enough. So I don't know if I can get on board with that. I think it's kind of splitting hairs there. Saying his arm is better. Garrett Nussmeier does have a freaking cannon, but also so does Joe Burrow. And the processing, that is where you lose me. Because that is what I think makes Joe Burrow incredibly special. He's got the swagger, he's got the attitude, he's got the effort kind of mentality that I think quarterbacks have to have. He's got the arm, he's got the ability to read defenses, but it's really it's the processing speed and it's the ability to stay calm under pressure that differentiates Joe Burrow from your average quarterback. So the processing, I think that I cannot get there. And look, maybe Garrett Nussmeier develops into that throughout time, but right now I cannot say that for a couple of reasons. One, because I think that Joe Burrow is an elite processor. The speed with which he processes, the way that he's just able to see things that maybe other people can't, I think is elite and special. So to say that Garrett Nussmeier is better than Joe Burrow at that, I think is not fair. And I'm also, to be completely fair, I'm judging this off of Joe Burrow at LSU in 2019. I can't judge this off of Joe Burrow as the NFL quarterback because that's not fair. So I don't think that it's fair to compare that because I think Joe Burrow was elite at that in 2019. I also cannot say that because I don't think that we've watched Garrett Nussmeier play enough football to say that definitively, frankly. We've seen Garrett Nussmeier come in either if Jaden Daniels got dinged up a little bit. We've seen Garrett Nussmeier come in after the half, whether it was against Army or Grambling at the beginning of the season last year. Like whenever LSU was up 100-0, we would see Garrett Nussmeier, and then we saw him start against Wisconsin. That's it. Like that. Like we have not seen a whole lot, like a massive sample size of Garrett Nussmeier starting at that position. So let's pump the brakes a little bit there. Look, and if that's your opinion, that's your opinion. And look, I hope you're right. Because if this is Joe Burrow 2.0, then hell yeah. You get 2 Joe Burrows, I'll take that in a heartbeat. Means that he's on a path for a Heisman Trophy. And to have 3 Heisman Trophy winning quarterbacks in the matter of 6 years, that is that's insane. So I hope you're right. And I hope Garrett Nussmeier develops into that. I'm not going to say that he can't, and I'm not going to say that he won't. All I'm saying is I don't feel confident in saying that right now at this point. But let's get back into some of your questions. It is, in fact, a Mailbag Wednesday. So we roll along here coming up next on Locked On LSU. All right, I want to tell you about Game Time. So, Game Time is the first place that I go to whenever I buy tickets. I swear. I was actually in New York not too long ago and I wanted to go to a Mets game. So, where did I go? Pulled up the Game Time app, just pressed a couple of buttons, got my Mets tickets, and I knew that I got it at the best price because that's exactly what you can get with the Game Time guarantee. Plus, if you're not a baseball fan, that's fine. If you're an NBA fan, then Game Time makes getting NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app, they actually go down the closer it gets to tip off. So there's killer last minute deals, all in prices, views from your seat, and the lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. So And there's also one of my favorite things about Game Time is that whenever you're looking for tickets, you get a full panoramic view of exactly what it's going to look like and your view from your seat. So you know and have 100% certainty what you're getting, what your view is before you buy. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code Locked On College for $20 off of your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, rolling along here, Locked On LSU. Thanks again for making us your first listen every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? And do you have to turn down the volume with all of that shouting? We'll make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every single day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. All right, rolling along here, Locked On LSU. It is a Mailbag Wednesday, so we are right back into your questions on a Mailbag Wednesday. Had a lot of schedule related questions. I'll just kind of run through a few of them here. Questions, comments, concerns, so on and so forth. I did a breakdown a couple of days ago about the kind of the breaks in LSU's schedule. It was one of the questions sent in on another Mailbag Wednesday. And I talked about how one break that I think LSU got is getting Oklahoma over Texas. It's not much of a break, but if I have to choose one or the other, I'll take the one that's not expected to be in one of the two best teams in the SEC, which I think Texas is expected to be. The other is that I don't really see a stretch in there that really scares you. Like we've seen in past years, it's like boom, boom, boom. Whether it's multiple road games in a row against multiple teams that are contenders in the West or in the SEC as a whole. We know what that looks like. Like we've been there before. So Ghost Walker, huge supporter of the podcast, so appreciate you. They comment in and says LSU doesn't have a tough stretch at all in the schedule. Every tough game is offset by a bye week, a chump non-con, or a home game versus an inferior opponent. And really, I don't disagree entirely because looking at LSU's schedule, well, they have a bye week before Ole Miss and they get Ole Miss at home. I think Ole Miss is going to be a really good team this year. I do. Just with all of the talent that they've added in the offseason and through the transfer portal. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. They get South Carolina's Juice Wells. I think that Ole Miss has the best receiving core in the SEC right now, at least on paper. They grabbed Walter Nolan in the transfer portal, one of the best defensive linemen in college football from Texas A&M. Princely Yellen from Florida, they added this offseason. Obviously, Logan Diggs, they added in the transfer portal. Jackson Dart comes back for his third year in this Lane Kiffin system. So I think that Ole Miss is going to be damn good. But LSU plays South Alabama at home and then a bye week, and then they get Ole Miss at home. I like that. I like that break there. And then here comes the tricky point. You go on the road at Arkansas, on the road at A&M, and then bye week, and then back home against Alabama. Again, you get Alabama at home. I like that. You play Alabama after a bye week, as LSU always does. So I agree, but I always say whenever I talk about schedule, especially at this point before the season in June, you never know. You never know. And like, call me crazy, call me paranoid, but I don't like that Arkansas game on the road at Arkansas and then on the road at Texas A&M. I understand it can be much worse. I understand it has been much worse for LSU. But let's not act like for some reason Arkansas has been way trickier for LSU than we all would like. The last four meetings, LSU's won 3 of the last 4. But the last 4 meetings have been decided by a field goal. By a field goal. LSU beat Arkansas 27-24 in 2020. Arkansas beat LSU. Remember that overtime game, 16-13. 2022, remember on the road at Arkansas, the Harold Perkins game. It was a low scoring game. It was freezing outside. Apparently, all the LSU players had the flu. LSU won 13-10. And then last year, the game at home, that was basically a shootout between Jaden Daniels and KJ Jefferson, and LSU won that one 34-31. And it came down to the wire. Like, that's the last 4 years. In the last 2 years, I think LSU has been the much better team than Arkansas has been. Yet it's still come down to a field goal. That's the game. Like, call me crazy. Obviously, I'm more worried about Ole Miss and Alabama and even Texas A&M on the road with a new head coach. But that's a game that's always tricky. And I think Bobby Petrino will either make Sam Pittman look like a genius or make him look like an absolute doofus. But I'm not counting out the fact that, like, maybe Bobby Petrino could be a good offensive coordinator for Arkansas. Like, call me crazy. They return all of their pass catchers. They've got a young and encouraging quarterback. And I know it's going to be his first year, and you get Arkansas early enough to maybe where the quarterback's kind of still trying to figure things out. But, like, look, that's not one that I'm just going to scoff at. So overall, I would agree with you that there is not a stretch on the schedule that's like, whoo, yikes. Y'all see LSU's schedule. Like, it's not like Florida's or Georgia's. We don't talk enough about how difficult Georgia's football schedule is. Let me pull it up for you really quickly because I think we talk a lot about Florida's schedule, obviously so, because it is ridiculous. It's the number one strength of schedule in the country. But Georgia opens with Clemson and then at home against Tennessee Tech and then on the road at Kentucky, on the road at Alabama, at home against Auburn, home against Mississippi State, on the road at Texas, home against Florida, on the road at Ole Miss, home against Tennessee, and then they host UMass, and then round the rest of the season out against Georgia Tech. Like, I know it's Georgia, and like they should be able to handle a schedule like that, but like now that's a tough schedule right there. Like those are some tough stretches in there. I don't see that with LSU, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be that the games that you think that LSU should take care of doesn't mean that they necessarily will, or they will do it in as convincing fashion as we feel they should. A la Arkansas the last 2 years. All right, we continue along with more of your questions coming up next here on a Mailbag Wednesday on Locked On LSU. All right, rolling along here with some of your mailbag questions. A lot of questions coming in on Twitter with the new, some of the reaction to the new start times that were released. It is so nice now that the SEC is with ESPN pretty much exclusively because we now know ahead of time, not just 2 weeks in advance or a week and a half in advance. We know, okay, week 10, LSU plays, this team at this time. Or if it's not, 2:30, it's going to be 6 o'clock. If it's not going to be an 11 a.m. kickoff. So love that because that would have saved me a whole lot of heartache when I was traveling to Baton Rouge for the LSU Tennessee game a couple of years ago. And I learned about a week and a half in advance that it was going to be an 11 a.m. kick, which was quite the damper on my travel plans back to Baton Rouge. But some questions about some of the start times. Just one person asked the question, what do you make of only one 11 a.m. kickoff? What do I make of it? I love it. Like, I love it. If there were 0 11 a.m. kickoffs, if 11 a.m. kickoffs were done forever, I'd take that back. I like 11 a.m. kicks because I can start my day with football. I just don't like when LSU plays them. Here's what I think about that, though. No 11 a.m. home games. Thank the good Lord up in heaven above. The flex games, there's several flex games toward the end of the season. Alabama's a flex game. I believe Texas A&M is a flex game as well. It'll be either 2:30 or 6 p.m. or later. Yeah, 2:30 or 6 p.m. or later. Like, cool, I can deal with that. It's going to be not a morning kickoff. So the only 11 a.m. game is on the road at South Carolina. This was a topic of conversation when LSU was playing Mississippi State at 11 a.m. game at 11 a.m. last season. And remember, they pulled over. They stayed outside of Starkville. They pulled over and started stretching in the parking lot of a car dealership that was obviously memed and tweeted about several times over that day. But a lot of the conversation that I had with former players told me sometimes an early kick favors the road team. Because if you are a home team and you're accustomed to 2:30 kickoffs, 6 o'clock kickoffs, well, now your daily schedule and now your game day schedule is completely thrown off. What you normally might do, you might normally get to the stadium at noon. Well, now you have to get to the stadium at like 7 a.m. or like whatever time it might be. You're used to waking up at this time on game day. Well, now you have to wake up even earlier on game day. The meals you eat on game day are different. Everything's the same, except everything's different. When you're the road team, well, everything's different. You're staying in a new hotel, you have a new routine, you are on the road, you're going into a new locker room, you're going into a different stadium. On the road, your routine is inherently going to be different. So adding another difference of a different kickoff time is just another thing to add to different. That's just what former players have told me. I don't know if there's truth to that or not, of kind of the mental headspace on game day. It makes sense to me. I'm not, that's not my opinion. I've never been there. I've never played a football game, so I don't know. But that is what former players have told me. So that's something interesting to think about. But I'm glad that the 11 a.m. games are exclusively on the road, and there's only just one this year. But that's going to do it for me today. Thank you for making Locked on LSU your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up on tomorrow's edition of Locked on LSU, I sat down with Andrew Lyon of Locked on Gamecocks. We talked to the South Carolina game. We talked about expectations for LSU football this upcoming season, and obviously the most appropriate tie to the LSU and South Carolina athletic departments recently. We talked some Paul Mainieri. So we'll catch up with Andrew Lyon on tomorrow's edition of Locked on LSU.